Welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show. If you are tired of chasing buy-in, frustrated with teams who can't seem to get on the same page, or over the constant struggle of holding people accountable without micromanaging, this is the show for you. I'm Casey Watts, speaker, author, and the creator of the Clarity Cycle Framework. I help leaders just like you take teams from frustration to alignment so teams can work collectively toward a common purpose in a committed way instead of against each other as though they are functioning in different organizations. And we do it all through the craft of clarity. Whether you lead from the middle or you are the front-facing leader of your organization, on this show, we bring clarity to the seemingly small things in leadership that make the biggest difference, because clarity precedes capacity. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into today's episode. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode. As usual, I'm pumped about this episode because we're going to be talking about how to facilitate better data meetings tomorrow. And I want to start by telling you a little bit about the first time I ever led data meetings. And they weren't necessarily awful, but I definitely wouldn't consider those beginning data meetings a success. I thought they were going to be highly successful because I had prepped like crazy. I had a plan to lead these meetings. I knew what questions I was going to ask. I had printed specific sets of data, and I even poured over that data ahead of time so I could decide, what is it specifically I want to be sure to point out that we can discuss. If you have not already noticed the problem, I want to pinpoint it for us, okay? It was all about me. And because it was so me focused, I ran into what I know so many of you do. And that is that I hadn't prepared adequately for the awkward silences and the lack of conversation. I hadn't prepared for things like crossed arms and scowls. I hadn't prepared for people pushing back on the data and feeling judged. I definitely had not prepared for the sometimes tears that happened during these data meetings. I was so focused on leading the data meetings that I didn't think about how to actually facilitate them. And these can be two very different things. So I want to dive into a little bit of the definitions between leading and facilitating. And if you go into the dictionary and you look up the word lead, you're going to notice several different verbs that point to the same kind of idea. So here are a few of the verbs that stood out when I looked this up: to guide, to direct, to serve as a channel, to have charge of, right? So you're probably noticing that these are more verbs that show control over something. And that's exactly what it was I was trying to do during these meetings. I wanted to have control over them and how they went. But if you look at the definition for the term facilitate, it's quite a bit different. And it is to help bring something about, or to help something such as like a discussion run more smoothly and effectively. So hopefully you are seeing the difference between these two verbs. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't certain meetings that you have to lead, but if we think about data meetings specifically, our goal should be to facilitate them. And we're going to talk about why in today's episode. But I will tell you, every time I led a data meeting, it would feel like people wanted to check it off the list, right? Like, this is just something we have to get done. Or I would hear phrases like, these kids can't. And by the way, I'm doing an episode completely dedicated to that next week. I already have it recorded from the car. It's going to be dropped next week, so be on the lookout for that. Or I would run into so much time being spent talking about nothing that meaningful, or talking only about a handful of students. Or maybe, just maybe, sometimes we would have decent discussions, but there would be no follow through after the data meeting, right? There would be no change in instruction. There would be no change in student learning. Or it wasn't significant enough to believe that the data meetings were contributing to any kind of growth in student learning or bettering our instruction. But when I learned to facilitate instead, so much changed. It was a tremendous difference. So today's episode serves to clarify that difference between leading and facilitating so you can have better data meetings, yes, tomorrow. Okay. And I want to let you know if any of this resonates with you and you want to build the skills to effectively facilitate data meetings tomorrow, you're going to go check out the Better Data Meetings Tomorrow course, which just dropped today. You can find that at catchingupwithcasey.com/better data meetings. Okay, so today's episode gives just a glimpse of that. And I want to let you know before we dive in that there are so many ways you can learn how to develop the skills of being an effective data meetings facilitator. And I'm going to tell you this again at the end of the episode, but I want to share it now. You can have the most beautiful agendas. You can have the most detailed agendas. You can have the perfect slides. You can have all of the data printed. You can have yourself poured over that data, but that's not necessarily going to result in an effective data meeting. You're not going to see significant changes in those data meetings. If we want them to be better, then we have to facilitate differently. We have to build those skills. So here's what I want to jump into, and that is the outcome that we're looking for. You will know that you have facilitated better data meetings when a few things are happening. We're going to dive into these 3 things. First, you will know you facilitated well if people know the purpose of the data meetings. Second, you'll know you facilitated well if people take ownership and lead with a plan. And then third, you will know that you facilitated well if people come to the data meetings with urgency and agency. So let's dive into these 3 things. And really, as we're going through these 3 things, you can kind of almost do a self-assessment. Where are you and your teams in terms of data meetings and these 3 things? So let's talk about purpose. So you'll know that a data meeting has been facilitated really well if people know the purpose of the data meeting. Most of the time when I'm asked to provide feedback or advice about a meeting someone has planned, I will ask just one question. One question is all it takes, and it tells me everything. And the question is, there's kind of a variation, so I'll tell you 2 questions, but really the question is, what's the purpose of the data meeting? Or really, it could be any kind of meeting. Like, what is the purpose of the meeting? And then the variation is, what is the outcome you're hoping for? And a lot of the time, the answer is, I'm not really sure. Like, we have scheduled this data meeting. We have it once every 4 weeks or once a month, whatever the time frame is. And we do it because this is the way we've done it. It is set in the schedule that we have data meetings periodically at these times. But we don't spend time thinking first, what's the purpose of the data meeting and what do we want the outcome to be? So if you're not sure what the purpose is, and you haven't made it clear to your people what the purpose is, then guess what? You've got everyone coming to this meeting not knowing the purpose, or they're each coming to the meeting with their own purposes and ideas. And what's happening is we're creating this underlying quiet chaos. I talk about that a lot in the book. And even though we can't see the chaos, like it's not unfolding before us visibly or physically, it shows up in the gaps in student learning, and it shows up in the gaps among the adults on the campus. Okay, so that's the primary. We will know we facilitated a purposeful data meeting if people know the purpose of the data meeting. I feel like I just said that like twice. So that tells you how important it is. Make sure there's a purpose for the data meeting. Okay, moving on. The next thing, you will know you facilitated a data meeting well if or when people take ownership and they leave with a plan. What I hear almost more than anything when I'm working with leaders on implementing collaborative meetings or PLCs is that they want teachers to take ownership. And they talk about how staff play the blame game during these meetings, specifically data meetings. And I've been there. I understand. I've heard it, but you know what? I've also done it myself. I myself, as a teacher and as a leader, have played the blame game. Or sometimes when I'm hearing teachers play the blame game, I tend to sometimes step in as though like I understand, I want to have empathy. And so I jump into the blame game as well. And we know that this does nothing for our instruction. It does nothing for moving the needle in student learning, right? But the more I hear this over time, the more I realize it's not really a problem with the teachers. It's not. It's a facilitator problem. That's an indicator that we've missed something in our leadership training. And I say our leadership training like globally. Like overall, we all have missed something in our leadership training. And that's a major part of this course, the Better Data Meetings Tomorrow course. I'm teaching 5 different facilitative strategies that we don't often think about when we're prepping for data meetings. And these strategies are the difference between leading and facilitating meetings. So I want to take you through those 5 things, and you can go ahead and start thinking about them right now. So the first thing is norms that matter. Are we setting norms that matter, not just within one data meeting, but from the beginning of the year? The second thing is, how do we shift mindset? That's the hard work, but it's work that you need to be doing. You have to learn how to promote mindset shifts if you want to have really effective data meetings. And then the third thing is learning how to ask data reflection questions that get your people excited about the work and that get them, what's the word I'm looking for? That get them invested. That's the word I'm looking for, invested in taking ownership of this. Okay. And then the last 2 questions that I want you to think about are, do you have a plan after you look at the data? It's almost like a so what, now what? So we've looked at the data, we've analyzed it, we have all of this information, but what are we going to do about it? Think about all of the times that you've left a data meeting and no one's doing anything about the things that you've discussed or with the data that you've discussed. And then finally, okay, so what now? What we see the needs. So how do we pave a data-informed path forward so we can get students growing? Okay, so that's really the kind of in a nutshell. The second thing is, how do we promote ownership? So the third thing, we will know we facilitated an effective data meeting if or when people come to these data meetings with both urgency and agency. Let me tell you what, if people fear data meetings or if they feel defeated before the meeting has even started, it will be impossible for the right kind of urgency and agency to exist. Some kind of urgency will exist, but it might not be the right kind of urgency. And I want to describe what I mean briefly by urgency and agency. Urgency meaning like we believe or we know that the work we're doing in this data meeting is important, and we're coming to the meeting knowing that this is important. And then agency meaning we or I have the capacity and power to act on what we learn from this data meeting, right? So we want them coming both with urgency and agency. And in order to build that urgency and agency, we have to be so proactive, like extremely proactive. And in the course, I share about two things majorly when it comes to being proactive. Being proactive with our language as a community of learners, and then being proactive by gaining insight from your stakeholders, the people that are coming to these meetings, and also providing feedback, because we want people to be committed to the work that's happening, not only during data meetings, but after data meetings. Okay. So do you remember at the beginning of this episode, I said, There are some things that you don't need to help lead better meetings. I want to refresh your mind on that. You do not, if you want better data meetings, there are a lot of things you don't need, and here are some of them. You don't need another agenda or a more detailed agenda to make data meetings better. You do not need a fancy set of slides that are perfect and pretty. You do not need another icebreaker or another team building game. And here are some things that teachers don't need. They don't need more chocolate and more Diet Coke. They don't need the work done for them. I can tell you that I've been there, I've done that, and it didn't lead to anyone growing except maybe me, but even then, I don't think I grew very much from doing all of the work. They also don't need another time suck meeting, right? Where they're just going through a list of students and saying basically the same things over and over and over again. But what you do need and what they need from you is for you to hone the skills of a masterful facilitator, right? They need someone who can help make data meetings run more smoothly and more effectively so nobody dreads them. Okay, so again, one way you can build these skills is by joining the Better Data Meetings Tomorrow course. Right now, you can get the course plus the workbook plus asynchronous coaching from me for the price of a meal with your family at a favorite restaurant. Seriously, it's $57, which is actually, if I think about it, that's less than what my family of 5 pays at our favorite restaurant. And we only allow our kids to get water, and we get water ourselves too. But that, guys, take advantage of it now. But also know that one of my favorite things to do is to work with instructional leadership teams so we can take these concepts to a whole new level. And that is best done in person together. I love doing that work. So I'd love for you to reach out to me, Casey@clarity-driven.com, and we can talk about what that looks like on your campus or with your teams. And then if you haven't already subscribed to the newsletter, I share something helpful every single week as we learn together about the role of clarity in leadership. Okay, so that's it, folks. That's the episode. I hope today that you have gained clarity about the difference between leading and facilitating. If we want to have better data meetings, we want to lean more into being a skilled facilitator. Okay. Again, check out the course, Catching Up with Casey.com/better data meetings. That will be in the show notes. And until next time, let me know what's been most useful in this episode. I will catch you later. Bye. Hey, listener, I am so honored that you listened to today's episode, and I hope you gained something valuable from it. I'd also be honored if you did me 3 solid favors. First, subscribe to this show. I've got a lot of great content coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Second, be sure you're following me on social media platforms. You can find me at Catch Up with Casey on LinkedIn or Instagram. And finally, if you are looking to book a dynamic and relatable speaker for your next event, conference, or retreat, I would love to bring a message about how the craft of clarity makes a significant impact on both leadership and life. Until next time, always remember, clarity precedes capacity.